Welcome, everyone. I'm Chris Cummings, the youth pastor at the Village Nashville, and we are so excited you are joining us tonight as we talk about parenting in a digital age. And we're sitting down with parents who fight, who are experts in talking about resources for parents and technology and how do we keep our kids safe. And so I'm going to throw it to them and let them tell you a little bit about who they are and how they got here. So Jesse, Sarah, thank you guys for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us. Yeah. Well, we have two teenagers. We have two boys that are 16 and 14. And somewhere around 5 years ago, when they were still in elementary school, we discovered some things that were alarming as far as other kids trying to tell them about these things. And that's what sparked and inspired us to get started with Parents Who Fight, to start being a voice in our community to help other parents and work together with other parents, learn more ourselves, to start helping our community and parents in it to protect their kids against the dangers online.
And so back then, it kind of looked like us just talking to a group of parents at our school, and we started getting more requests. So we still do that. We still, when schools are in session, we have done some virtual PTAs. We, come alongside parents in schools and in churches, but we also started going into homes because we found that parents were really desperate for someone just to walk them through setting up parental controls on the gaming system and really looking at that unique setup for the ages and the technology that they had. And then in the past couple years, we've been getting on board any legislation that's happening in our city, in our state, or in the nation that is protecting kids. We're lending our support to that, and we've been doing some work in the legal realm in that way.
And we are so appreciative of all of that work because it is so important. It seems like every week there's a new thing that, oh my gosh, now what?
Yeah.
So we're so thankful for that. And I don't know if you guys heard, but they're doing one-on-one coaching with families, and we're going to be giving away 3 coaching sessions to anybody who fills out the form linked below. We'll give it about a week, and then we'll be selecting our winners, and you will actually get to sit down with them virtually on Zoom or on a phone call and talk through your specific family needs and how they can be helpful. So we're really excited to be offering that as well. But tonight, you guys have 7 core foundations for families to think through. So we'd love to hear, what are these things that you have found helpful with your family and other families that you've worked with?
Yeah, there's really a number of training methods you could go by. But for us, we want to just emphasize that in the teen years especially, which is what your youth group is made of, but even prior to the teen years, your goal as a parent is not to just wrap them in bubble wrap, it's to train them. And there's a number of ways that you can do that, but we've kind of consolidated some of the things that we talk about the most and answer the most into 7 training methods tonight. And as Christian parents, we're looking at, the Bible doesn't say how many hours a day your kid should have on the Xbox. It's not that specific. So that
answer's not in there.
No, not in there. So the overarching goal is, we want to help our kids know how to glorify God with their lives, which includes technology. Which means we need them to be able to bear fruit, because that's what Jesus said in John 15, that we'll glorify him when we bear fruit. And we bear fruit by being pruned, which is painful sometimes, letting some things go, and by learning to abide or remain and rest. And so those things are going to be foundational as, speaking to Christian families, for knowing how do we navigate technology and how can we help our kids. So
love that.
Yeah, so there is lots of different parenting methods, training points, and 7 steps and this and that. But we did try to just narrow it down for the sake of this video time to 7 training methods. And one of the first one would be in your relationships, building healthy relationships. So like Sarah was saying, I think the key one we believe is building your relationship. The key relationship would be building your relationship with God, or your faith, building your faith and strengthening your faith in various ways. And then as parents, as a married couple and as parents, building your relationship and getting on the same page, especially when it comes to things like technology. But really with anything, you have to get on the same page. If you're not, especially if you have teenagers, they will smell that out in a heartbeat, and they will call you out on it, or they will do things to exploit your when you're not on the same page. But then, as you've gotten on the same page as parents, then you need to build. You need to be building your relationship with your kids, of course. So in building that relationship with your kids and your teenagers, it's important to, with regard to tech and all the things that you're going to do, whether it be other things that we'll talk about as far as like, if it has to do with monitoring or accountability, etc. You also really, it's important to do things with them that don't involve any technology. So do fun things, get out, try to bring balance. So it's healthy balance in your relationships. So we just really emphasize trying to balance out the tech stuff with doing things outside, like going for hikes, or if we can go camping, or if it's just a one day or a half a day thing or a morning thing, just getting out of the house, even if it's taking them outside to go shoot hoops or something, just to break up the desire to just sit and absorb technology or play video games or whatever. So building that relationship with your kids is super key. As our kind of our main, first point is relationships.
And that's totally makes sense, because without relationships, probably the rest of your list doesn't really matter.
Right.
Yeah, it's
got to be that foundation, right?
It's foundational. Yeah, it's like, let's build a good foundation with our relationships, and then build everything off of that.
If you look at, the years of technology training can be very tenuous, and problems are going to happen, and there's going to be conflict. So your relationship is the bedrock of what your kids fail and land on. And so strengthening that relationship from the front, making sure that that's where your investment is going, is really important.
I think that's so awesome. And as I've seen families wrestle with how do we do this, that time together in relationship is key, so that they know that they can talk to each other about the why of some of the other decisions we're going to be talking about.
Yes.
Because without that relationship, like what we're saying, the rest of this doesn't have anything to stand on.
Exactly.
Yeah, and one of the things about it is, whether it's kids or especially teenagers, at first when you suggest doing something outside or getting away or going for a hike, they don't want to do it. They usually don't want to. I mean, maybe there's that random, if you have a teenager that just loves, doing that stuff all the time, you are blessed.
Yes.
And, but we've found that kicking and screaming, what have you, if we just get them there to the thing, even though they're like, this is going to be lame, and, this isn't going to be fun. I don't want to do that. I want to do, once you get them there and you start doing the thing, whether it's a ropes course or just a hike, you find out they really loosen up and they open up, and then you'll have those conversations. And like another area where you'll have really good conversations is like often right at bedtime, when all of a sudden they're just kind of like everything's coming to them, they're getting ready for bed, and then sometimes they'll open up, and really you can build have great moments and build relationships that way.
I think that's so key. And there's actually a principle called the third thing with teenagers, but especially with males, where if you can be doing something else, then the walls of lack of conversation and relationship kind of come down a little bit.
Yep.
And you can actually engage in those deeper conversations. So like bedtime or hiking, all those things. I think those are great examples. Okay, so relationships are foundational. What's next?
So the next training method we have is creating boundaries, which are essential for your kids growing in wisdom. And with technology, there's a number of ways that you can do it. When you have young children, you obviously need to block parts of the internet, that you just completely lock that door and they can't get to it. But as they grow and they have greater depths of access, it's really being prayerful and intentional as you go to the next step. So, don't just buy a new PlayStation this Christmas and bring it into your house without really knowing, can we handle this? Can our kids handle it? Do we know how to protect it? And then as you feel like, okay, they're ready for these levels, you don't have to give them every single thing all day long. So for us, when we introduced our oldest with a smartphone, which was about a year ago, he had only productivity things for a year. Or it might mean closing off and saying, yeah, you can have that gaming app, or you can have email if that's a big issue, for finding links to places. Okay, you're going to have that for 15 minutes. So it's really just being very prayerful and intentional about looking at the various places in technology and saying, okay, where is our kid capable and can steward this well, and where is it going to be a struggle, and really allowing that access to grow as your child grows, but not just coming in as a parent and saying, these are the rules, this is what you're going to do. I know when we brought a gaming console into our house, we had a big family meeting, and we talked about, okay, how much time as a family do we want this to occupy? What is right? And when we look at all of our other priorities, we came up with a number of this is about the max that we could handle a week. And how is that going to be spaced out? So just really looking at training your kids and knowing they don't have to have everything. It's like you have a budget for your money. You can't have everything. And knowing, where are we going to spend that time? What is okay for my kid to have? What can I give them instead of the whole internet? And Jesse's going to talk a little bit about that with delaying certain devices. But really creating boundaries is about helping to control some of the access, because you can't control everything on the internet. Your kids are going to find things that are going to shock you. But what you can control is how much they have access to it and where they have access. Not putting a phone, not letting their phone go into their bedroom, not allowing their computers to be in the bedroom, those kinds of rules. And for every family, there might be various places in the spectrum that your family falls. If you have a divorce situation where you're navigating two households, there are a lot of things to talk through when it comes to access. So creating boundaries is just getting very intentional up front and making sure that you have an agreement about how much, where, when, and what are you ready for.
Yeah, and I would add that just don't be afraid to set healthy boundaries, because actually, even again at first, if they don't like it, kids will interpret it as care and love.
Yes.
As long as you're handing out those boundaries, like she was saying, in a way that conveys that love. It's not real like policing, but it's a communication thing. But you're letting them know it's healthy, and they will appreciate it. You're leading them.
And if you have younger kids and they're growing up with boundaries, that is already their expectation when the smartphone comes in. So that's very helpful. And if you're finding that you're feeling like, oh, I don't have any boundaries and I have to go back, you already know that's going to be harder. But it's not impossible. And we'd be happy to talk with anybody about how that could work in your home. If you feel like we've run into some things, we need to create boundaries, how do we do it? Just drop us an email. We'll connect with you.
I love that. And I love this idea of doing it in conversation too, and not just walking in and being like, no smartphone.
Right.
But to actually be like, let's talk about what matters to us, and then how does this fit in? And that goes back to that relationship bit of how do we exist together as a family and what matters to us? I think that's so important. And it's really, the boundaries are like training wheels.
Yes.
You're not going to just put a kid on a bike and be like, good luck.
Yeah.
And you're setting the boundaries. You're not going to just throw candy all over and be like, you can eat whatever you want. We set boundaries. Technology is just another place to do that. So I think that's key. So how do we do this delay thing that you guys were mentioning?
Well, delaying with social media and smartphones being sort of like these huge examples, but there's a lot of things that we should try to delay until the right time, until the right time for our family and for our kids and where they're at. You know where your kids are at. You're the ones, you are the parents, or the parents are the ones that are with them most of the time. You're the ones watching them grow and training them up in the way that they should go. So with social media, though, and smartphones, and the way that it has changed so quickly and progressed, we're like, delay as long as you can with these types of things, smartphones and social media. We were a part of a documentary called Childhood 2.0, which is it's a great documentary.
Available on Amazon Prime.
Available for free. You can watch the whole.
Or on
it's
YouTube.
About an hour and a half. It's well worth it. And there's another one that's a really great documentary that we weren't a part of, but it's called The Social Dilemma. These are a great pairing for parents to watch first at whenever you can, and then determine if you would watch it with your teenagers to help you strike up conversations about the dangers and risks of social media and smartphones and all that it's brought in over the last 5 to 10 years. But even the director of The Social Dilemma states that it's more than fair now at this point that we're at with social media. It's more than fair to wait until high school range to allow your students to have social media. We definitely are not opposed to technology or anti-technology, I guess is more the word, but we would just say, waiting until the right timing and trying to help your kids have a process that is a little slower. It's having to pull back the reins on, with society pushing and the pressure that's there to jump on and get all the things that everyone else has. Our oldest son in 3rd or 4th grade came home and said that everyone has a smartphone or everyone has social media. There was like one girl in his class that had a smartphone and had an Instagram account, and that is a problem. But they'll say everyone has it, so I need it. That's not always truly accurate to what's really going on, and so you can pull back the tide and slow your kids down and slow the process down of how they progress. We do want to train them and release them into adulthood eventually, and we want to help them learn to take responsibility for their own actions and the things that they're doing. But however, we can pace that out at a slower pace than the world is throwing at us. One way with smartphones is like an example of an actual thing you can use, a tool, is something like Gab Wireless. Gab Wireless was a dad or a couple of dads that realized there was a need for some kind of phone that looked like a smartphone but didn't have all the access to the internet and all the smartphone features. They just, at a certain age range, they just needed a phone that they could get a hold of them on, and maybe texting. It has a camera. The first version has a camera, but they can't send those photos. It doesn't have MMS messaging. They can't do group messaging. It's just simple text messaging, simple phone calls, a calendar, basic a calculator, and our younger son figured out a way to use the camera editor to make little GIFs. Mm-hmm. But it's just creative. Awesome. It was creative, and it's but he does not addicted to it. He sets it down and moves on. It's like he uses it for what it's made for. And so there's lots of things like that out there. There's tools mm-hmm. that we can use to just slow the process down and delay. So delaying is key.
And remembering that our kids' brains are still forming.
Right.
And they're not really ready for the kind of access that smartphones and social media bring in early adolescence. And so, obviously, like I said before, every family situation is different. We've come across, families that are like, well, my ex-husband bought them this phone and they're going back and forth. And so there are solutions even within those things that you can't control. And again, we'd be happy to talk about that one-on-one with any of you. But just remembering that our kids' brains and their age and all of the pressures that exist anyway, when you add a smartphone in, it brings another layer of anxiety and difficulty managing their priorities. And then when you add social media in, it's not just that it's social media and like, oh, it's so dangerous, like a predator might get to you at a younger age, for sure, if it's not monitored. But it's also like you're talking about, serious like eating disorders, suicidal things, all kinds of
Anxiety,
cyberbullying,
depression.
things that just are layering on top of our kids. So really knowing, when are they resilient enough? That's like a big factor.
And I think the two documentaries you mentioned, Childhood 2.0 and The Social Dilemma, show us the back end of what they're doing, which is intentional, like brain chemistry things to make us addicted.
Right.
Yeah,
And
like
then,
gambling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like you said, the teenage brain, and especially the childhood brain, are just not ready for that. And
Right.
when I'm talking with kids, I always talk to them about, I was like, technology is great for bringing people together that are far away.
Mm-hmm.
And it is equally as good at separating people that are sitting next to each other.
Yes.
It's good.
And when
It's a
you
good way to
sit
put it.
down to a meal with them, they're not present.
Right.
And there's something about that relationship, going back to that foundation, that you miss out on if you don't have these training wheels and the delaying of certain things and giving them just like baby steps towards the next thing and the next thing, because there's so much at once.
Right.
And if you give them everything, it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And we've
It's
seen that
it's
over and over and over
overload.
again. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So how do you monitor this? So we've talked about like some delaying of it, but like how do you keep track of what they do have?
Yeah, so at some point you do need to cross that bridge. We don't really advocate for your kids, high school graduation present, here's a smartphone. I mean, they need more training than that. And monitoring is kind of your way. If you think about any job you've been trained for, it's like you have a supervisor, they're making sure you know how to count the money drawer and do all of the things right. So there are ways that you can manually monitor these things, obviously knowing all of their passwords once they, enter into that land. Again, for a time, when they're an adult, you don't need to know their passwords. But for a time, knowing, if you have an account, I know about it, I've authorized it. But there are also some automatic monitoring tools that can really cut down on time and give your kids, as they grow, that feeling of, mom and dad aren't in every conversation, but if there's a red flag, we're going to be able to talk about it. So one that we use and recommend wholeheartedly is called Bark. And they actually were a really big part of the Childhood 2.0 movie. So you'll hear a little bit more of their story if you watch that. But they basically are going to be able to scan through our kids' text messages using machine learning, through his YouTube views, through email, and it sends us an alert when there is something problematic. And they also do monitor several social media platforms, and it's a little bit different based on iPhone or Android, but they monitor a lot of things so that you're not having to open everything and look through and make sure. But you'll get a message from Bark saying, hey, we noticed this, just you might want to check in with your child. So that's, again, a really great fit for the kids who are advancing into high school, because you do want to train them, and you can't train them if you're not noticing and commenting. It does you no good to just worry about what they may have seen instead of just talking about what they've seen and making sure that they know that I know that they've seen it. That sometimes is the biggest deterrent. So there are a number of various tools, and there's all kinds of, on your phones now we have, iOS has screen time so that I can set boundaries around things, but I can also look at how much time they've spent on things and get a feel for that. I can block off certain parts. So as parents, really that monitoring piece is, I feel like, one of the biggest things that we miss because it feels intimidating and we don't really know how all that works. So we just they're getting straight A's, so they seem like they're okay. But you don't have to look very far before you realize that kids who look okay on the outside could be crumbling on the inside. And one of our, favorite youth advocates, Katie McPherson, goes on record all the time saying everything you want to know about your kid is in their phone. And so we want parents to break through the barrier of, discomfort and get equipped to know how to monitor that activity. It's really the kingpin for making sure that you're addressing issues along the way.
So how do you handle when a kid is like, this is my privacy, like,
right,
this is my private information?
I mean, it's great if you've built an environment in your home of actually, nothing that we do is private. I mean, if you just look at how many people have had their photos leaked online, you realize the privacy argument
there is no privacy.
Really goes out the window as soon as you're using the internet. But, even with our kids, I mean, our kids have known pretty much their entire lives that we've used Covenant Eyes as a filter browser because there's accountability. We get notifications when anyone has seen something. So our kids have grown up knowing accountability is actually a Christian value. And therefore, it's not that privacy, kids think of privacy as dignity, and they're not the same. Because I will let you, shower and clothe yourself behind a closed door because that gives you dignity. But I don't let you change the lock on your door and never allow me into your room. And so that's the difference. So really helping them, and again, it goes back to that, that family meeting of what does this device introduce to you? And we're going to walk through it together because one day you're going to walk out my door with that in your back pocket by yourself. So I want to make sure that right now we're having these uncomfortable conversations so that one day when you have no one around you, you have that internal filter and you think, oh, I probably shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, you're reminding them right now, I'm still responsible for you.
Yes.
As I'm your parent, I'm training you. This is part of training, and you're telling them about these things ahead of time. So
right.
You don't hand them a smartphone all dialed in with all your monitoring and spyware, whatever,
right.
parental spyware, and not tell them. You talk to them about that first. You explain why, and that it's part of protecting them, training them. It all ties into I'm responsible for you, but eventually I'm going to give you I'm going to start handing over these
right.
responsibilities to you for you to manage as you get closer to the time you're going to be leaving our home. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit on one of the other points, but that planned emancipation of you're going to be released to launch into life as an adult. So don't worry, we're not taking all your privacy. We're training you. So. And
I think that's what's great about Bark is it's not showing mom and dad every text message, but it is showing you, hey, that, somebody was talking about suicide. And then you can address
it flags really important key things, whether it's suicidal, depression, profanity, pornography, sexual type stuff, various kinds of risk type words.
And I've seen Bark be effective for families in our church.
Yes.
So we've actually seen it save a life.
That's awesome.
So some suicidal ideation we were able to be a part of, like solving and getting them help, which is really, really cool. So tools like that come in real handy, and that permission giving to parents of like the privacy thing and dignity are two different things. And I think that's a great way of saying that, because a lot of times there's like, no, this is mine.
Right.
It's like, well, we're helping train you to become adults, and to do that, we have to walk through it. So I think that's really, really important. And part of becoming an adult, especially at the teenage level, is sometimes you just mess up. Whether you meant to or not, failures happen. So what do you do when a failure happens?
Yeah, failure, navigating failure is actually an amazing training method because you, when your kids fail, then you know, oh, we need to go back and circle back to that, or that's something I haven't taught you well enough. And the biggest key goes back to point number 1 about relationship is don't freak out. Do not freak out. Especially one of the biggest things that comes to us super often, because we talk a lot about pornography in our organization, is my kid is seeing porn. That's the number 1 thing that parents come to us about. And we always tell them, don't freak out.
Don't panic.
Yeah, because really you need, settle yourself. If you've got an elementary school kid, like your kid's gonna see it at some point. So train your own self to think, how will I respond when this happens? So there's lots of educational things you can do prior to that. 8 to 10 years is the average age of exposure. Good pictures, bad pictures. That's all I'm going to say. It's a book. Google it. But if you're in the teen years, you're parenting a teenager, responding to the failure is really important to look at. Okay, what did you learn? And where can we go from here? Because again, I don't think it's helpful for a kid to leave my home having never failed in a safe place when it comes to a smartphone and social media. And because my kids know that about me, they know I'm probably going to get social media before I go to college, because mom and dad would never just turn me over, to figure it out on my own. And so even, along the way, we have had lots of moments where it was like, okay, let's talk about why that's not a good choice. And when they feel safe to fail and come to you about it, then that sets you up when the stakes are much higher. And so right now, them failing, is something that is manageable most of the time. It's not, hey, mom and dad, I accidentally, hacked the Russian server, like in that old movie War Games. But they're, it's usually things that they realize I didn't do this. You want them to come to you. Now, will kids come to you all the time? You don't know, and you don't really have any control over that. But building that relationship when you find something on Bark, or you look at their Google activity, this is like gold mine, parents, you should know. Outside of their history, every kid who has a Google account has a Google activity page that keeps stuff on there that has been deleted from their history. And I look back at it regularly because my kids are doing virtual school, and just see, what have you been doing? Because I can't close off the entire internet when you're doing virtual school. So I have to, so just really having those planted conversations, not waiting for things to heat up. If you notice, oh yeah, that, they're spending a lot more time on that, or this makes me wonder if something happened, and really going to them and saying, hey, I just want to talk with you about some things that I noticed, and not making it a discipline issue right away, but making it really, really safe and navigating that failure together.
I love that idea of making it more of like a conversation and a learning tool, as opposed to a shame, you're terrible, why would you do this thing?
Yes.
Because the relationship part, which is foundational to all of this, the learning tool helps continue that relationship, whereas the shame and how could you, oh my God, the freak out, you gotta keep that poker face, parents.
Right.
That relationship part of just like, well, so what did we learn? How do we do better? Because often that first exposure isn't intentional.
Right.
And so to like freak out and be like, how would you do this? And they didn't even mean to do this. That is an initial shutdown of that long-term thing that you're trying to build.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's it doesn't mean you get rid of consequences if they do something that breaks the boundaries or breaks your guidelines, breaks things that you've already agreed and communicated to them well, that these are, this is a boundary. But like you're saying, it's really the initial how you respond rather than react.
Yes.
And we don't do that perfectly as parents.
No.
I don't know if anybody does.
We're not sitting here on a high horse trying to say that we always respond well. But, realizing that's a relational interchange. It goes back to the foundation of relationships. And as parents, we've had to repent and apologize to our kids for how we reacted, and just pull back and I'm sorry I did that. That was wrong. Will you please forgive me? And then they learn that as you've done it over time, and then you can still bring consequences when they're necessary, but just get that initial relational conversation going first of like, and being loving to them, to say, what can we do to help you, avoid that pitfall.
And I think too, we need to give our kids some freedom to fail. So, what kinds of things your kids are like, Mom, I can handle it. I don't need these time restrictions. I can handle it. Take the time restrictions off for a couple of days and let them see, I can't handle it, or maybe they'll surprise you. And if our kids don't feel that that freedom being given to them gradually, especially in those high school years, they are going to feel like we just want to control them. And so part of training is us being able to face our own fears about our kids stepping out into a new area that I previously wasn't comfortable with, and giving them the opportunity to try. And maybe they'll fail, but maybe they'll fly.
I love that, and I think that's so important to figure out. So it's really easy to just do the huddle mentality of just no.
Yeah.
Gonna hold you tight. But then they graduate, and now what?
Right.
So taking the training wheels off, giving them the next step seems like so valuable for these learning phases. And I like that we're doing it in phases and not just like, here's the entire world of smartphone. Good luck.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
But so how do you do that? How do you do these gradual steps of freedom, so to speak?
Well, yeah. So along with, freedom to fail, it goes to our next step of training. Our idea is, and it's not like we just thought of these wordings. We learned it from other educated people in the past. But gradual emancipation. Gradual emancipation has to do with starting to give them the responsibilities they're ready for and letting them experience some real world consequences of that. So it starts to become not always us delving out all the consequences, and we're just the big bad parent always hovering over them. And everybody's going to have their different, parenting strategies. Like I said earlier, there are things that they've learned from books. We've read a lot of books, and we've listened to a lot of podcasts. And there was one book that was written a while ago that's called "Feeding the Mouth That Bites You," and some of the things about social media and they have a podcast now, I think, too, so they've probably updated because things have changed so fast. But it's a really great book to read or listen to. You can get it on audiobook, and it's helped us start to see what to do with our 16-year-old who's getting ready to, go into the last few years of high school and into college, so that we don't do that. We don't just kind of hold on too closely and keep them from doing anything, and then all of a sudden, here you go, here's the whole world, and it's all you're responsible for whatever you do. See you later. So hope it works out. But it's giving them little freedoms that you can help them deal with, in your own home. So an example is like, when you get to your junior or senior year, there's other advice out there that says, like, in their senior year, now that we really stand with when kids are younger, not to have any media or devices in their room, in privacy, behind closed doors. It's just very risky, and they're not really ready for that responsibility. But their senior year in high school, maybe their last half of the year or something like
After
that.
they've gotten into their favorite college
Oh,
and they've gotten
yeah.
the best
After
SAT
Once
score.
the online won't keep them out
Yeah.
of the okay. Yeah,
While they're still at home for that last little run, that last little stretch, let them have everything in their room and just like they're in a dorm room. They got to get ready for it, but it's kind of within a different starter context of like you're at home, so you can have a little room to practice and fail, but with mom and dad still there to train
But
you.
previous to that, so we were talking young adolescent years, gradual emancipation for technology might be like, okay, it was a big thing when we were like, you can now play multiplayer games.
Yeah.
That we didn't let our kids do that for a long time. And then it was like, okay, now we can tell you guys know the rules. You're ready for it. So you can do that. You can, have your phone on later at night. Or we're not going to,
You can stay up later.
Yeah, you can stay up later. You can control the music that's happening on your phone. All I ask is that you let our youth pastor follow you on Apple Music so he knows what you're listening to as well. But there are things that you just start to release to them. So for us, like putting our kid's email account on his phone was a big deal. Because it was a big stumbling block for him for a long time. So, okay, now you have your own, you have access to your own email. And then, it was games. And then, so we're adding in things that we're not closing the door to everything. We're adding it in as they're ready.
No, I think that's so important. And I love the idea of like the gradual steps, because handing them everything at once is just overwhelming.
Yes.
And when you hand them a new step, go back and check back in and say like, okay, so you have this new freedom. What have you learned that has been helpful? And then what have you learned that you've struggled with that we can help work through? And I think you guys have been naming all those along the way. And I think check-ins like that have been so helpful. Like, hey, you've earned a new freedom.
Yeah.
Don't just give it and then not follow back up on that. Like, talk back through, have it continue that relationship.
And one thing that I just thought of that we did at first was we took control of all the notifications on the new phone when it came into our son's life. That's not locked by a password. It's one of those things that whoever uses it can adjust. And so at some point, it was like, you know what? You're responsible for your distraction and attention. So we talked about it. Here's what I think is best. And he has had to learn through failure. I got to turn this notification off for this group chat or whatever. So, but it was something that at first we didn't give him the freedom. We want your notifications to be minimal, but then eventually, okay, now you need to be in charge of that.
I think that's so important. So with all of this, how do we model this for our kids? Because I don't know about you, but like adults are pretty bad at technology too, and we're just as addicted.
Yes.
It's not just teenagers.
Well, because nobody trained us.
Exactly.
We didn't have parents to train us. That's what I think.
Part of the grand experiment.
Yes, we are. I mean, gosh, when I watched, Childhood 2.0 and The Social Dilemma, it was very, helpful, even for us to just remember. A big thing, I think, for parents going into the years of monitoring and training teenagers is, don't put anything on their phone that you wouldn't be willing to have on your phone. I have a social media limit. I have a downtime on my phone. I watch all my notifications so that I'm not getting sucked into things. And I check in with my kids and I say, do you feel like, other kids, I hear them complaining about their parents being on their phones all the time. Do you feel like is that something that I do? And that's helpful. At times it's been yeah, at times it's been no. So I think, really just being intentional, again, it all comes back to intentionality. But as believers, it's like asking the Lord, your word says that I'm to ask you to search me and know me. And so show me if there's anything in my life that is putting technology as a distraction. Right now, it is very easy to medicate whatever situations are happening in our life where we don't have this and that and the other thing is all taken away and our lives are more constricted. It's really easy to medicate that with entertainment. And so, I know I have to be like, we're going outside. We're just going to go outside. I want to model that for my kids. And I also think there are little sneaky things that parents could be more aware of. So as a woman, I notice this with younger girls that are coming up into our, youth ministry, or just, friends' daughters or whatever, just kind of watching the school landscape, is that there is a lot of concern that girls have about how they stand for photos. And I'll never forget when I was at my son's first band concert, and there was a sweet little 5th grade girl, and she was in the bathroom, kind of doing her hair, and she was holding her phone up and taking selfies. And I naively, I don't have girls, said, "Oh, would you like me to take a photo for you?" And she was a little weirded out, like, why would you do that? But I'm thinking, I'm actually a really good photographer. I really am. And so I'm thinking this is going to bless her, and I could tell as soon as I took it that she deleted it.
Yeah.
And went right back to taking selfies, because she wants to procure that image perfectly. So, I say to all the moms out there, how many times do you retake a photo because you don't like how it looks? How many times do you stand in a photo with the stupid hand on your hip and your knee pop? It's just, I know it's a nitpicky thing, but it's like we have to realize how much of this culture has seeped into our own lives as adults, and model for our kids confidence. And I can laugh at myself. And I, don't say things to people online that I regret. Or if I have done that, I'm happy to share it with you as my own failure that I learned from. And so really just being transparent with them and asking the Lord, God, is there anything that I do with technology that doesn't glorify you? And putting our kids first, where we're really giving them eye contact, where we're giving our spouse eye contact at the end of the night, you know?
I was going to say, it's easy for us to notice the big traumatic things that are problematic.
Right.
But what we don't kind of notice is the little things along the way that start to add up and eat away at our kids and our emotions, our self-worth, all those things. So it may seem nitpicky, but it's important for us as parents to kind of get granular sometimes and look at those things. And then to your point and your question about us as parents and how do we, I was just going to mention that trying to, I like to call it sanctifying technology. It's like the sanctification process we work out our own salvation or as Christians. But so trying to develop good habits, like for me, I've realized if I'm going to pick up my phone and start looking at it first thing or earlier in the morning, I've tried to get in the habit of opening my Bible app first and looking through the history of Bible verses or something, just to get my mind off of wanting to go to Facebook or something like that first, putting that first. And so then one big habit was when our kids come down, we usually are up in the morning before them. So when one of our kids comes down and comes into the room, if I'm on a piece of technology, it's like shutting it or putting the phone down, and the pivot of turning towards them and making that eye contact, like she was saying, and just, connecting with them, giving them a hug first. They have noticed, and they will notice that turn or that putting that phone down and that eye contact and that pivot, even if they're all groggy and out of it and they just kind of they act like they don't want a hug right now. It's like we make that initiative. We take that initiative and make that effort.
Yeah, and another big thing too is we try to go on, when we go on vacation, is to not have technology present.
Media fasts.
Yeah, and to really shut it down, a couple of times a year, where we're laying aside our technology. I leave my house sometimes without my phone.
How do you live?
I know, but it's like, you know what? I'm with Dad. He's got a phone. If you need me, we'll be okay. And just really helping our kids see, I don't have to have this everywhere. And if my phone dies, it'll be okay.
I think that's so important, this modeling. We do it in so many other things in our lives. Right. Why would we not do it with technology? But like we just said, nobody's trained us in this. We're all trying to figure this out. It's just the diet of what we eat.
Yes.
It's easy to go to the high sugar stuff to get that quick fix, but you're going to need it again and again and again. And that's what social media does to us.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if we can find the real relationships where we are truly connecting in person or with nature, that's actually what really gives us life to the full.
Yes.
And so like making those trade-offs are really like big trade-offs when we think through it. So I think that modeling is key.
Yes.
Yep.
So important.
I love that. Well, this has been so enlightening, and I hope that it's been helpful for you as families. I know there's a lot of things we could talk about, and it's always changing, but I think these principles are key always for how we think about technology and keeping our kids safe, but also how do we engage in this new digital world that we find ourselves in. So remember, check out Parents Who Fight. They're on all the social medias, ironically, but they're there. They also have the website, parentswhofight.com. And remember to fill out that quick Google form below so that you can enter to win a chance for a coaching session, a one-on-one coaching session with them. And we are just so thankful that you joined us, and feel free to share this with anybody that you know that would find this helpful. We hope that you have a good night and stay safe. Peace.